there just isn't equity in the world. So my calling absolutely is to help these kids who are wonderful kids, and they're just born in a place where they need help. They need help to both spark the spirit inside of them and to use the gifts that God's given them.
It was still March, and Kathy sends me this text, and she said, every day is looking like a food fair. We're having over 200 people show up to get food because they're out of jobs and out of work, and they don't know where else to go.
Well, hello and welcome to Session 4 in Changing Lives for God in Christ, an ongoing study here at St. John the Divine, where we're trying to pray through and talk about ways that we can be an even stronger church community for our sake and for the sake of Houston and the world around us. I'm very grateful for your participation in this. When Jesus bursts on the scene with his early ministry in the Gospels, he calls disciples and immediately tells them what the end game is, that you will be fishers of men. In other words, that as they come into relationship with him and learn from him, grow with Jesus, they will go forth to bless as they themselves have been blessed.
Before my trip to the Holy Land, I knew who God was, but I had no idea about the Trinity. Just grew up with the family, and we went to church, of course, but I'll be honest, I didn't necessarily understand or believe in the Son or Jesus. That's what changed for me. I have to say, I grew up with my education and just in our world, grew up thinking that relativism was, what's real. And Doug was like, well, there's only one truth. And I thought, what? Well, and literally I thought, what is he talking about? And I listened, and then that night I just contemplated it, and for the first time ever really actually probably prayed in a way that was real. And so that's the beginning of my life changing, was that one conversation.
I think I've been taking the men's life here for maybe a year and a half when I first ran into the phenomena of urban squash. So from that, I was a little bit intrigued. What is urban squash? And later that summer, I was in New York and managed to carve out a few hours to go to Harlem, where the street squash program is. And I interviewed some students and some staff members there. And I got my butt kicked by a 15-year-old boy. And they were a fantastic kind of like a team. The kids had really below par schools that they went to. A little girl that I met, she had been struggling with her grades and now was straight A's. She loved the program. All her friends were going to college, and she had found school a place where she was very nervous because fights broke out all the time in the classroom, and she felt safe there, safe in the program. It was a really heartwarming experience meeting those kids and seeing that this after school program was making a huge difference in their lives. And I came out of that and I said, we can do this, and we can do it in Texas, and we can do it better. So Mission Squash is an holistic program, and our goal is to help kids from low-income backgrounds to reach their full potential.
Mission begins with transformed lives ourselves, our own changed lives. Paul says in chapter 4 of Ephesians, you must no longer walk as the Gentiles do. In other words, not as you used to walk. Chapter 5, verse 1, he says, be imitators of God as beloved children. There's that family imagery again, but a new identity. So point one is that mission begins with changed lives for ourselves and asking the question, well, in what ways, if any ways, is my life discernibly different than it used to be? In what ways is my life distinctive from my unbelieving friends or questioning friends or seeking friends and family around me?
And I found the food fairs at Echoes, and which is Christian healthcare and outreach organization in the southwest part of town. And so I would go once a month on Saturdays and serve at the food fairs there. I took over the outreach for the food fairs. That was transformational too, in a way, because I would spend a lot of time thinking about, okay, well, what have I been hearing in what I'm learning from Charlie in class, or what I'm learning through the sermons or reading scriptures, and I would think about, okay, how can I see that come alive?
But when it comes to the natural and inevitable question is, well, why doesn't everybody believe this? It means so much to me. I can't understand it. Maybe we could think of several reasons. One is there are people who are simply ignorant. They've never had any exposure to the life of the gospel, and so they're really not to be faulted as much as loved. How can we reach people who've never had the gospel shared with them? They've never had living contact with a robust Christian life. The second thing is there are people who are simply resistant to the truth. They may be offered testimony and they simply reject it. And of course, there are people who at one point were members of the gospel community of the church and have turned away from it. But a third very important reason, and sometimes we're a little reticent to talk about this, is that there is a spiritual reality, the enemy, Satan, working against the purposes of God. And this is thoroughly scriptural. So what Paul is inviting us to do is to be mindful that when we bump up against resistance to the gospel in our relationships with other people in the world and the culture, it's not so much that other people are our enemies. No. They are captive to a spiritual reality, the demonic forces of wickedness that rebel against God. We do not wrestle against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the cosmic powers over this present darkness, against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly places. Well, that sounds scary. What are we to do? Do not lose heart. Remember who you are. Remember to whom you belong. We have all the spiritual resources necessary, and then some, to overcome the enemy.
So people ask me, why do you do Mission Squash? What drives you to do it? And I'm not entirely sure what got me started in Mission Squash, but there's just an huge inequity. Where a kid's born, who decides that? I was very fortunate that I was born into a house where I had loving parents, and they believed that education was important, and that's been, critical to me throughout everything I've wanted to do in my life. These kids, they grow up into they're born into a house with, maybe no stability, maybe parents who don't speak English, don't understand the importance of education. The schools that are available to these kids are usually the schools that have least resources. So the goal of Urban Squash, the goal of Mission Squash, is to give these students an opportunity and to give them the ladder so they can climb out of low socioeconomic status, and emerge from the poverty trap, and to go forward and have either a solid job by finishing high school and getting a 2-year degree, and then being a professional and being able to support their family, or that they can get a 4-year degree and, have a career and be able to maintain a family, and to be able to give back to help support the community. There just isn't equity in the world. So my calling absolutely is to help these kids who are wonderful kids, and they're just born in a place where they need help. They need help to both spark the spirit inside of them and to use the gifts that God's given them.
And it is here that Paul uses that famous image, here's another one in the letter to the Ephesians, of putting on the whole armor of God. With so many people who've read the letter through the centuries, I imagine that Paul has had a lot of chance, if he's in a Roman cell as a prisoner, to look at the way Roman soldiers are outfitted in their uniforms, and he's thinking about what that would be as a Christian symbol. And so he says, put on the armor of God as opposed to the armor of Caesar. And I think there are at least two dimensions to the metaphor here. There is defensive armor. We need to defend ourselves against the wiles of the enemy. A helmet, a breastplate, for example. But we're not simply passive in the face of the enemy either. We have offensive weapons, the sword of the Spirit, which is the Word of God. And if we entrust ourselves to that Word, if we are committed to growing in that Word, we will find that we are more capable of going forth for God with the sword of the Spirit, which is a sword of truth and also a sword of love.
Over the years, my involvement there has become deeper, and really that all happened during COVID. It was still March, and Kathy sends me this text, and she said, every day is looking like a food fair. We're having over 200 people show up to get food because they're out of jobs and out of work, and they don't know where else to go. On Fridays, I would go and just help pass out food. And it was incredibly rewarding. And it was very chaotic, I will say. And just to see more and more people coming each and every week was a lot.
Some of the things that make Mission Squash very special for me is when I go to a tournament or an academic fair that the students are participating in, and I get to meet some of the parents, spend some time with some of the parents, and they thank me, and they just tell me how much their kids love Mission Squash, how it's changed their lives, how it's so much more than a program, that it's really a big family, and that it's just so heartwarming for me that all the work and the energy that the board and I put into it is really very worthwhile. It's just amazing being part of it, and sometimes I feel this is really, what am I doing this for? I just get the rewards are just so amazing.
So I invite you in your groups to reflect a little bit more on this image of what it is to go forth into a world that doesn't always exhibit hospitality to the message that we have, and how we might not be discouraged in that, but especially in this day and age when there's so much data telling us that more and more people are falling away from the church. How can we feel encouraged, indeed even more privileged than ever, to be those to whom God has entrusted the gospel, to go forth, to love our neighbors, to love our city, to love our world?